Coming up next on KPBS Evening Edition, medical marijuana dispensaries are fighting back against efforts to shut them down. They say they're taking their battle to the ballot.
And if you owe more on your house than it's worth, you're not alone. We'll tell you how many homeowners in San Diego are underwater and what it could mean to the future of the housing market. KPBS Evening Edition starts now.
Hello, thanks for joining us. I'm Joanne Ferrian.
And I'm Dwayne Brown. San Diego's medical marijuana dispensaries are fighting a federal crackdown. They want to take the matter to the voters. More than 60% of the dispensaries in San Diego and Imperial counties have closed after federal attorneys sent letters warning landlords their properties could be seized if the businesses stayed open. Their proposed ballot measure would regulate the clinics and allow the city to tax them. Proponents would need to collect about 62,000 signatures to qualify for the November ballot next year. We'll be talking with one dispensary operator about the measure in just a few minutes.
There were more early morning arrests at the Occupy San Diego protest today. 9 people were taken into custody, most for sleeping at the Civic Center Plaza. Police say the protesters can be in the plaza, they just can't sleep there. One person was arrested for vandalism. His offense? Police say he broke branches off a tree. The protesters say their next move will be a West Coast port blockade in solidarity with occupiers in other coastal cities.
The state's firefighting agency could face a manpower shortage because of the new prison realignment law. Thousands of lower-level criminals are being shifted back to county jails in a budget-cutting measure. CAL FIRE uses nearly 4,500 inmate firefighters, but could lose 1,500 of them unless counties pay to send them to state-run fire camps. But many sheriffs say they can't afford to pay the $46 per day per inmate the state wants to charge for those camps.
California voters say they still approve of the job Governor Jerry Brown is doing, but they're much less pleased with the state legislature. The newest field poll gives Brown a 47% approval rating. 36% of those polled disapproved, and another 17% had no opinion. Opinions on the state legislature were much more negative. 62% of the people polled felt state lawmakers were doing a poor job. Only 22% approved, and 16% had no opinion. And nearly 70% of those polled said the state is on the wrong track. Only 21% thought California was headed in the right direction.
San Diego Congressman Duncan D. Hunter is urging President Obama to leave military pay alone when considering cuts to the defense budget. Right now, the Defense Department faces $600 billion in cuts because the Congressional Super Committee couldn't agree on how to reduce the deficit. In a letter to the president, Hunter says he's committed to preventing those cuts. He's asking the president to exempt military pay from any reductions.
Earlier this year, Congressman Hunter criticized the naming of one of the Navy's newest ships. And now some lawmakers want the Navy to explain how it picks names for new ships. Hunter has said the naming of the supply ship Cesar Chavez appeared to be politically motivated. The Cesar Chavez is being built by the NASSCO shipyard. A provision in a defense bill passed by the Senate last week would require the Navy to send Congress a report on the naming of ships. And in a House defense bill, Hunter himself has suggested naming a ship for Marine Sergeant Rafael Peralta, who was killed in Fallujah and then nominated for the Medal of Honor. Both the House and Senate bills are threatened with a presidential veto because of provisions that are not related to ship names.
The 70th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor will be commemorated this week from San Diego to Hawaii. Tonight, we hear from one of the few Navy survivors who lives in Poway. His crew actually witnessed a Japanese submarine try to enter Pearl Harbor several hours before the fateful attack.
December 7, 1941. These are the sights and sounds of what President Franklin Roosevelt called a day which will live in infamy. The surprise attack by Japanese warplanes on Pearl Harbor lasted about 2 hours. When it was over, 21 ships in the Pacific Fleet were damaged or destroyed, along with 188 aircraft. But the largest casualties came from the 2,408 people killed on the ground and sea.
I'll never forget it. I'll never will forget it as long as I live.
Raymond Chavez has seen a lot in his 99 years of life, but didn't realize his mine-sweeping crew saw the first signs of the Japanese converging on Pearl Harbor. They spotted an enemy sub several hours before the bombs rained down from the sky.
It's just a shock. So many were killed and wounded.
Chavez says he remembers to this day the destruction and smell of smoke, but it wasn't until the 50th anniversary of the attack he opened up to talk about it.
He never spoke to me about Pearl Harbor. The only way I knew he had been there was my mother had told me the story. Other than that, he never spoke about it at all.
And it hurts to see somebody like that dead or wounded when you knew him just a few hours before they were in good health.
Nearly 70 years later, he tries to remember the things that kept them close.
In the service, that's what you do to pass the time. You kid each other, joke, and some of them to come up with some pretty bad ones too.
Tomorrow morning, Chavez and his daughter will fly to Hawaii. He'll join the few remaining survivors for commemoration of the attack on Pearl Harbor Wednesday. Now, Joanne has more on the battle over medical marijuana in San Diego over at the Evening Edition Roundtable.
As we told you a few moments ago, medical marijuana advocates are fighting back against an effort to shut down dispensaries. Dozens have closed since federal authorities sent out warnings that their properties could be seized. Last week, we found one dispensary operator who switched to home delivery.
Reverted back to delivery and continue to help out our patients. You know, like most businesses would actually try to bounce back. A lot of people just quit. Deliveries are very discreet. The patients get it at the privacy at their own home.
Joining me now is Greg Schultz. He's with the Patient Care Association and director of GSC Wellness, a dispensary here in San Diego. Thanks, Greg, for coming in.
Hi, how are you?
Good. So, first of all, tell me the status of your dispensary right now.
We're still operating. We're somewhat busier than we normally would be in light of so many places closing. And there's about 60 left right now open, and we estimate by the end of the month there'll probably be about 20 left.
How are you still able to operate, given the federal and local pressure?
Well, I just received my city lawsuit, which is the quickest one. I just received that 2 weeks ago. So we have a time period in which we have to answer it. And then you have an additional time period after that in which certain things have to be done. And so we're just going through the steps. And, of course, we're fighting it. So that's why we're still open.
And now several of you want to take this fight to the voter. Tell me about this ballot initiative.
We have a new ballot initiative, and it pretty much covers everything that the Medical Marijuana Task Force recommended months and months ago that the city should have adopted. And so we're planning on releasing that soon within the next week or two, and we're planning on taking that to the voters.
Let's remind our audience about this task force. Now, several months ago, the city did put together a task force, and they said come up with an ordinance so that dispensaries could operate legally within the city of San Diego. A group, advocates of medical marijuana, actually fought against this ordinance to put that on the ballot and say we don't like it, and now we have nothing. So
no,
weigh in there.
That's not true. They hired a group of people, which was the Medical Marijuana Task Force, to come up with sensible regulations for dispensaries. The Medical Marijuana Task Force did come up with adequate regulation ideas, and the city chose not to use that. And they chose to go with a much more restrictive, which was actually an outright ban. The way that they had put together that ordinance, it would have eliminated any collective from operating for at least 2 years. And more sinister than that was that there became word out from the building department, which would have been in charge of deciphering who got permits, that was actually somewhat of a smokescreen, and that they wouldn't, in fact, be issuing any permits.
I see. So it was that you want the task force recommended ordinance as opposed to the city one?
Absolutely. The task force was made up of many, many, many good people, including religious people, business people, a multiple of very good people. The religious people that were in the panel who were against this in the beginning ended up being for this in the end. So the task force did a great deal of really good work.
In a nutshell, people at home right now, what is it you're going to ask them to vote for? What's in this initiative?
We're going to ask them to vote for something that the city should have done, months ago. What's in the initiative is health and safety issues, when a dispensary can operate, what they have to operate in the way of security, how do they protect the surrounding environment around the dispensary, how do you keep it from targeting children, ethics. We have a very strong code of ethics in the Patient Care Association, so there wouldn't be any of the negatives like the Bob Marley posters and somebody smoking something on their window. There's a code of ethics that would make it, so you had to have a 100% clinical look like a doctor's office.
And not only, though, you have not a lot of time, you have but a year to get signatures, gather enough signatures, but what about now the federal government? So even if you get this ordinance and the voters say we want it, you're still fighting the federal crackdown on this, aren't you?
We're still fighting the federal crackdown, but here's the issue with the federal crackdown. Okay, if you'll notice, the feds are not in Colorado, they're not in Oregon, they're not in any other state that has medical marijuana. They're only in California. We have lawsuits against them for discrimination. The reason that they're in California is because our own city attorney, Jan Goldsmith, our own city council member, one of our own city council members, a city attorney from LA, and also another city attorney from a northern California city asked the feds to come in and help them. So there's some definite issues going on with this whole Fed thing.
Well, we'll have to follow up on this one for sure. Thank you so much, Greg Schultz, for being here.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
City Attorney Jan Goldsmith has agreed to come on KPBS Evening Edition next week to talk about this issue. A spokesperson for his office did tell us the city did not influence the federal attorney's decision to crack down on the pot dispensaries. A spokesperson from his office sent the following statement. 4 California U.S. attorneys and the United States Department of Justice decided to enforce federal criminal drug laws without Jan's instigation.
A new report says nearly a third of San Diegans are underwater on their home loans. In a moment, we'll look at what it means for our economy. And from our Biz Tech desk tonight, how algae could be a green bullet for our energy needs. This is KPBS Evening Edition.
I'm Jeffrey Brown. On the next NewsHour, German and French leaders meet on the European debt crisis and the latest on the Republican presidential campaign. That's Monday on the PBS NewsHour.
In the last year, KPBS News has been honored with nearly 36 awards. I'm extremely proud of these honors, and I thank you for your support as we continue to serve our local communities with award-winning news coverage in the years to come.
My music brings back the sound of the 60s. Join your hosts, Davy Jones and Peter Noon, for this all-new PBS special.
Tuesday at 8 on KPBS. KPBS Evening Edition is made possible by Joan and Irwin Jacobs and by
Welcome back to KPBS Evening Edition. A record number of students have applied to San Diego State University next fall. More than 69,000 prospective students applied for undergraduate admissions. That's a 15% increase from last year and comes despite increasing tuition. About 51,000 of those applicants are prospective freshmen. Soaring oil prices and $1 billion in public and private money put algae biofuels on the map in San Diego 2 years ago. The possibility diesel fuel can be grown ignited a race among several local companies. KPBS business reporter Eric Anderson says next year will be critical for a fledgling industry hoping to create a green bullet.
The lab is typical, small, cramped, and full of equipment. The work here could transform the energy landscape, because oil generated by algae is the same molecular structure as fossil fuel oil. That makes the two interchangeable. They can be blended, exchanged, and shipped the same way. Dr. Stephen Mayfield says graduate students are culturing different strains of algae.
Here's a plate, and we've shot in a gene, so now we have 4 or 5 different colonies here, and each one of these colonies has a new recombinant gene in it. And that recombinant gene could impact lipid accumulation, it could impact crop protection, that could be a nutraceutical, it could be a pharmaceutical, and we can go from here to there to big scale in 6 or 8 weeks.
Mayfield runs the San Diego Center for Algae Biotechnology at UC San Diego. He says researchers have made huge advances perfecting strains of algae that produce the most oil or lipids. The work isn't limited to the lab. At a nearby greenhouse, algae is grown in ponds and bags.
We're seeing the sunlight change during the day. We're seeing the temperature change at night. Predators can land in here and eat our guys, right? So this is much more real world. So part of this is simply see if what we're learning in the lab has any chance to survive in the real world.
Working out those problems is the key to making the product economically viable. Oil from algae has already powered a jet and a battleship, but it has yet to make sense financially. The technology got a lot of attention when more than $1 billion in funding, half of it from the U.S. Energy Department, flowed to local companies.
Expectations were significant because, remember, the price of oil was way up. It peaked at about $147 per barrel. Gas prices were going through the roof. People were looking for ways to cut down on their energy consumption and expenses.
San Diego's Synthetic Genomics, Sapphire Energy, and a local General Atomics division are among those racing to move the idea out of the lab. That competitive push has created 500 local jobs and a multi-million-dollar economic footprint with the potential for more.
They know the technology needs to be brought along. It needs to be able to produce a consumer product at a price competitive level with other energy sources.
That means building a full-sized algae farm and harvesting large volumes of oil. San Diego's Sapphire Energy is about ready to do that.
It's the first step in commercialization. It's the first step the country's ever made to commercialize algae into an energy product. And it's a substantial leap in discovery and science.
Vice President Tim Zank says their 300-acre demonstration facility in New Mexico will churn out 1 million gallons of oil a day.
We need salty, briny water. They have billions of acre feet. We need very intense sunlight for this phase of the project. That will change over time. They have an abundance of very intense sunlight, and they have an abundance of desert.
A large-scale farm is critical. Zink says biologists and engineers need to work out the best ways to grow, harvest, and transport their fuel. And they need to bring down the cost of production. Economists say that building farms in places like the Imperial Valley would fit nicely with San Diego's concentrated research and development facilities. UCSD's Stephen Mayfield says a powerful demonstration project could also fuel more funding from both private and public sources.
Doing a computer-generated diagram of it is one thing. Getting out in the field and walking it and seeing the production that comes out of it and seeing the oil flowing out of it, that's a game changer. That's a mind changer, I think, for everybody in this country.
That was KPBS reporter Eric Anderson. The Defense Department has expressed interest in developing biofuels to power military machines. That could become a steady source of funding for San Diego's fledgling industry. A new report finds so many people are underwater, it may be tough to find the bottom of the housing market. Joanne's talking about it with her guest over at the Evening Edition Roundtable.
California has more homes with underwater mortgages than the national average. That's according to the latest figures from the real estate tracker CoreLogic. In fact, California ranks 6th in the nation, and that might be the good news. Joining me to explain this, Dr. Michael Lee, director of SDSU's Corky McMillan Center for Real Estate. Thank you, Dr. Lee, for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, I say good news because in the past we've been 5th instead of 6th in terms of having the highest number. We've moved down a little. Is it enough to really make any difference, any impact here in California?
Not yet. I think that we still have a very high percentage. I think 29% of properties have negative equity, and they present a risk to the market. So I think that the fact that we've gone from 5th to 6th doesn't mean a lot.
So remind us a little bit in terms of being underwater on your mortgage, what that means exactly.
That means that you owe more on the mortgage than the house is worth. So your effective loan-to-value ratio is over 100%.
Now, you mentioned about 29% in California. I think it's 28% in San Diego County. Do we have another point in history, in recent history, where we've had numbers like this before in terms of mortgages being underwater?
No, this is totally unique.
Totally created by our whole housing bubble, the whole fiasco.
That's correct.
Now, you mentioned they present risk. What kind of risk, both whether it's on a local level or even a bigger economic level, does having this kind of a number of underwater mortgages pose?
Well, on an individual level, when you have your much high loan-to-value ratio, you are fragile, meaning that if anything happens, you'll kind of look at your situation and say, can I continue making this payment, or shall I continue making this payment? And we also have strategic defaulters that basically say it's not worth it. The average loan-to-value ratio is about 130%, so you can see people are significantly underwater. When you move up to the community and even the national perspective, the large percentage of underwater mortgages presents a risk to the housing market, because if these loans eventually become distressed and the foreclosure properties, then what you're going to end up with is further downward pressure on house prices, which negative effects on communities and the nation.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because I think every year we've been asking, or every few months, have we hit bottom? Knowing that we have about 1 in 3 houses in this sort of situation, I guess you would argue we haven't hit bottom, potentially.
Well, I think we're bouncing along the bottom with risks for more downside movement. So I think there are some positives in the market now in terms of we're starting to see some job growth, low interest rates, and people, expressing interest in maybe getting into the market. But again, the risk is out there of a lot more distressed sales, and distressed sales are what drive down prices.
And if you are someone with one of these mortgages and you're maybe paying a higher interest rate, when I say higher, 6 to 8%, I think, is what a lot of these homeowners are paying right now, instead of 4%, which is sort of a going rate, you're not able to refinance, are you?
No, you're not. That's been one of the sticking points, is that we can't get these people to have lower payments. A lot of the modifications for people that were in default were aimed at that. How can we reduce the mortgage payments? But they didn't deal with the degree of negative equity. A recent program that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac came out with, called HARP, is designed to allow more refinancing of underwater mortgages, but most people think that that's going to have just a modest impact.
What about principal? Are there programs that say, okay, maybe we just ultimately have to reduce some of these principals on the mortgages?
Well, I think in terms of reducing the backlog of negative equity, that's really the only way you're going to do it in the short to medium term. And banks have been doing principal reductions on loans they own. And about a third of their loans have actually had some degree of principal reduction. And we know that when the principal is reduced, the likelihood for default is down. The problem is that the agencies, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and FHA, aren't allowing principal reduction, and therefore we're still seeing the big backlog.
Dr. Michael Lee, thanks so much for being here.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you, Joanne.
Well, we all know San Diego is a pricey place to live, but a national travel magazine says it's an inexpensive place to visit. San Diego ranked 3rd on Budget Travel's list of top budget destinations for 2012, right after the Azores and Egypt. The magazine cited drops in hotel and rental car rates as some of the reasons for the ranking. And we've got an update on a popular but controversial North County site coming up in just a moment. This is KPBS Evening Edition.
Tuesday at 10 on KPBS.
Because of our members, it's possible for everyone around us to discover something new every day, right here on KPBS. And in doing so, our members make this a better and stronger community. Thanks for your support.
How did Charles and Ray Eames become the most important husband and wife design team of the 20th century?
The Eames chair.
From furniture to filmmaking, they thought outside the box before anyone even knew there was a box.
The concept is mind-blowing.
Enjoy Eames on American Masters.
December 19th at 10, only on KPBS.
Welcome back to the Public Square on KPBS Evening Edition. As we told you earlier, a group of medical marijuana activists want to put the question of where and how pot dispensaries can operate on the November ballot. Many have shut down because of a threat of legal action from the city and federal government. Here's our question tonight to you. Do you want to see this on the ballot? Should San Diego City Council take another stab at an ordinance, or is this a matter the voters should decide? Let me know what you think. You can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and of course you can always email me directly, jfarian@kpbs.org. And now Dwayne has a recap of tonight's top stories.
Protesters with Occupy San Diego say they're planning a port blockade next week. They say the Occupy movement will stage blockades up and down the West Coast on Monday. Some members of Congress want to know how the Navy chooses names for its ships. A defense bill passed by the Senate includes a provision for the Navy to submit a report on ship naming. It's a response to a controversy over the U.S. Navy ship Cesar Chavez. A San Diego congressman says that name was politically motivated. An arts committee in Encinitas is supporting a new home for the surfing Madonna. The mosaic became the center of a battle, if you recall, over the summer. It had originally been put up without permission on a railroad bridge and removed after it was deemed graffiti. The artist proposed putting the mosaic a block away near Moonlight Beach. That idea is now going before the City Arts Commission. You can watch and comment on any of the stories you saw tonight on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night. We leave you with a look at the windy forecast.